Hey guys, sorry I don't have a very good microphone at the moment, so I'm just using the mic on my headphones. But I just wanted to go over the basic human physiology of the nervous system. So I've already gone over the muscular system, but the muscular system kind of ties into the nervous system in a lot of ways. In fact, I think it's a lot more helpful to kind of understand completely the basic physiology of the nervous system before you even attempt to understand the muscular system or even a lot of the other systems that rely on signals from the nervous system to operate. Um, so I kind of just wanted to go over it again just to consolidate it in my mind because I've got a lot of exams coming up because I'm doing a human physiology unit this semester. Um, I did a last semester I did um, human anatomy course. So basically, I learned all of the parts of the body and their basic functions, but physiology is more of an in-depth view, like a microscopic view of how all the parts work together and um, you know basically um, basically how they work together and create really large complex systems. And arguably the nervous system is the most complex one. Also, sorry, you can probably hear the howling in my apartment. It's very high up, and the wind just like blows through it, and my roommates don't want me to close the door because I don't know. Anyways, yeah. So what I was saying is the nervous system is spans throughout the body, but it has a lot of classifications or like subdivisions, right? Um, and each one kind of do different things. They operate in different areas, and but they are all very vital. And if one was taken out, all of them would collapse, and you would die. So, yeah, I wanted to go over some basic things first. So, the nervous system is separated largely into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Those are the two main divisions, right? So, the central nervous system is made up of the brain and spinal cord. All right, so whenever I'm talking about the central nervous system, it is really only in the brain and spinal cord. So it doesn't really it doesn't really seep out into the rest of your body. That would be the peripheral nervous system, which is the other main division. So the peripheral nervous system is essentially all of the nerves, sensory, motor nerves throughout the body that carry out a variety of different roles. But on a basic level, the nervous systems work together to deliver electrochemical signals throughout the body to perform or signal a variety of tasks or functions, right?
Please subscribe.
Okay, so the basic unit of the nervous system is a neuron. Okay, so and just like the nervous system itself, the neuron has various different classifications. So there are the three main classifications that I know anyway. There obviously may be more, a lot more. I'm just going off based off what I know. There's the sensory neuron, the motor neuron, and the interneuron. All right, and these can be further classified into being unipolar, bipolar, multipolar, which just essentially means how. Wait, before I go into that, I should probably go over the structure of a neuron because otherwise it might not make sense. Okay. Yeah. So let's take a sensory neuron. Okay, it has its cell body, soma, surrounded by many dendrites, right? And what those dendrites do is it senses a change in the external environment, whether it be temperature, pressure. If you get touched, if something touches you, you can feel it, right? Those are because the sensory neuron is there, and it picks up that signal. Okay, so then the information it flows, it enters the dendrites, or no, the dendrites like pick it up. I don't know how to explain it really, and then that information flows through to the axon. Right, the axon is this long pathway essentially, and the axons are covered by this fatty substance called the myelin sheath. Those are produced by these cells called Schwann cells. And essentially, what the myelin sheath does is it wraps around the axon, and it seeks to speed up the speed. I don't know, increase the speed in which the electrochemical signal can flow through the axon. Okay, because when you're thinking about sensory information, especially when it's relating to pain or something that may need to be processed very quickly in order to escape like a dangerous situation, right? You want that signal to be going very fast. And I would hope that my body was well prepared to send that signal very fast. So, indeed, it is. The myelin sheath increases that rate in which the electrochemical signal passes through the axon, and then it eventually reaches the axon terminal. Okay, the axon terminal is at the end of the axon, and what happens there is the signal is passed from one neuron to another one. Okay, which the axon terminal will connect to the dendrites of another neuron. Okay, so imagine your body, to get to your brain, the processing center, it needs to go through all of these neurons, Okay, so that is a very, very oversimplified version. I think I'll go into the mechanics of how that signal is passed a little bit later. But I just wanted to give you a brief kind of summary of it. I'm so sorry, that is probably really loud. I don't know what to do about that. Next time I'll have my mic, but I was just studying right now, so, and I don't have it, so I kind of just wanted to take advantage of it. Anyways, now we have the motor neurons. So motor neurons, as the name suggests, help us move, right? And what they do is they receive information, usually from a sensory neuron or an interneuron, and then they attach to a muscle. And then I went into the mechanics of that in the last video, not very well, because that was when I made that video. I made that the day that I was learning about all the mechanics of muscle contraction, and I thought that just kind of talking it out would help me understand it more. And it did, but I didn't quite understand all of it. And you can probably tell if you know what you're talking about and you watch that video. It would probably be very obvious that um, I have a very big gap in my knowledge. But I'm getting better. I'm trying to, at least. Okay, so motor neuron attaches to a muscle and then innervates that muscle. So imagine that you're lifting. If you want to, say, do a bicep curl, your brain obviously sends that information to your bicep to contract, and that message is sent to a motor neuron. Okay, interneurons, they are special, like they don't really have as like their use or their purpose isn't really as black and white as sensory or motor neurons. It's really just to relay or carry that electrochemical signal, um, between neurons. Um, so yeah, you got the sensory, the motor, and the interneuron. Okay, and sensory neurons, I talked a little bit about how the differences between unipolar, multipolar, and bipolar were before. But now that we understand the basic structure of a neuron, um, I can kind of go more in depth into what that really means. So, unipolar simply means that um, the this cell, the neuron, has one axon. Okay, so this cell gathers information, and then it just has one axon that the message flows through to another um, neuron or group of neurons. Okay, so bipolar, the same, but it has two. And then multipolar just means it has a whole bunch, which is very, very important in especially motor neurons if you want to innervate lots of muscle fibers at once, because your muscle just wouldn't move, if only a single muscle fiber was innervated with each motor neuron, whereas with um, sensory neurons, they are mostly um, unipolar, which is helpful because with sense and with touch, especially when you're trying to locate, say, pain, you need that to be as specific as possible. So having each section of your body kind of just innervated by one sensory neuron helps with that specificity. Whereas motor and interneurons, they are more uh, likely to be multipolar because when you think about it, it does make sense. Even if my explanation isn't the best, but yeah, okay. Perhaps we see. I've got like a very brief thing of what I wanted to go over, but maybe we should go into the mechanics or the mechanism of the electrochemical signal transfer, possibly. Okay, I might have to do a bit of drawing, but yeah, that's okay. I'll do a bit of drawing, but it's not very good. Okay. Okay. So this is I'll probably put a picture on screen when I was talking about the neurons before, but this is an example of a unipolar um, neuron. And okay, so we see here that the uh, sensory information is collected here at the dendrites, and here's the nucleus. Okay, travels through here. This is a spot here in between the soma and the axon. Is this place called the node of Ranvier, and that becomes very important later when we go into the mechanics of how this all works. And see, the electrochemical signal will flow through the axon here, which is insulated by myelin sheath. And forgive me, the electrochemical signal doesn't actually flow through here, but rather it jumps in between. I don't know, can you see that? Sorry. Jumps in between the gaps in the myelin sheath cells. And I'm not too educated on physics, but that actually somehow increases the speed at which the signal is sent. Okay, and then here at the end of the axon, we have the axon terminal, which they're not actually to be like this, but these bits here, they actually release something called a neurotransmitter, which when they are released into this little gap between neurons, which is called the synaptic cleft. I think, yeah, it is. Whoa, my eye is so red. Anyways, the synapse. Wait, there's a synapse and then the synaptic cleft. Wait, let me just type that. The synapse is just the joining of two neurons. Okay, thank you, Google. And the actual gap though is the synaptic cleft. Okay, so then they release neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft, which then are picked up by neighboring neurons, which then activate a process which causes depolarization, and we'll get into that later. And then the signal is transferred. Also, okay. So this next stage it's very complicated. So I'll just try and kind of go into it very shallowly, but I'll try and explain it as best as I can. It's a multi-stage thing. So the main principles of it are, there's this thing called the action potential. No, I should start before that. Okay, so neurons, they have a lot of potassium on the inside. They also have some sodium and other stuff, obviously, but largely potassium, okay? Then on the outside of the cell, there's everything else, but there is more sodium on the outside than there is on the inside, okay? And because of this, the outside of the cell has a very positive charge, and the inside of the cell has a very negative charge, okay? Think of it like a salty banana. That's what I said in the last one, but it makes sense, right? Lots of sodium on the inside, lots of lots of potassium on the inside, lots of sodium on the outside, okay? And however, for the signal to be passed through, the inside also needs to be positive, okay? So a process called depolarization happens, or needs to happen, for that signal to be passed through, okay? So essentially what happens is at the dendrites, when neurotransmitters are picked up, okay, and also this may be, I don't want to start my explanation by saying this may be wrong, but because I'm fairly confident in my knowledge, but there may be things that if you're a professional and you hear this, you're like, that's not entirely correct. But I don't. Yeah, I'm fairly confident, but sometimes when I speak, I'm like, wait, I'm not too sure. Sometimes like I confuse things in my head, you know. Anyways, okay, neurotransmitters are picked up, right? Sodium channels open, all right. So a lot of sodium starts to flow into the cell. That slowly, let me draw a graph. That slowly increases the charge, okay? So here's negative. Here's negative. Oh, it's backwards. Shit. Wait, should I draw it? I'll draw it. Oh, wait, no, it flips it again once I'm done recording. Okay, maybe this will be right for you then. Okay, so this is the starting charge. I forget what it actually is, like the actual the like actual charge. I learned it. They said I don't need to know it, so I didn't commit it to memory. Okay, so here, okay, neurotransmitters are picked up, sodium channels start to open, charge begins to rise. Okay, now there is this very important line, and that is called the action potential threshold. Let's have a see. Okay, yeah, it's a action potential threshold. Okay, see, I like say things and I'm not too sure, but like I'm fairly confident in what I know, but I just doubt myself a lot. Anyways, so neuron firing and action potential is what it's called when a electrochemical signal is successfully passed through a neuron, and action potential, right? However, for an action potential to occur, the charge needs to reach this threshold, right? And it is an all or nothing system. So um, if the the charge does not reach this threshold, a signal will not be passed. However, once it does reach this threshold, um, there's no going back. Essentially, the signal will be fired. Oh my god, my eye is twitching. That's really annoying. Okay. All right. So reaches this, then it suddenly. This happens. Okay, sorry. All right. Once it reaches the threshold, then depolarization occurs, right? And this, remember when I said that this bit is very important, the node of Runvia, because that is where the action potential really like reaches that all or nothing position, right? So here all these sodium gates open, sodium flows. Oh, you can't see that. Sorry. All these sodium gates open, and energy starts to blah blah blah. Once it gets to here, that's where it must reach this threshold, and then once that happens, all of these sodium channels open, and the charge just spikes. Right, that is called depolarization, because since the inside of the neuron was negative and the outside is positive, that is polar, right? However, now that they're both positive, they're no longer polar, so it's been depolarized. Okay. Yep. Positive, cool. And then whoops, signals pass through. Okay, but now it needs to return itself to a resting state, because otherwise it will just keep firing. So then what happens is, it opens potassium channels. Okay, potassium starts to flow in. Cool. Charge goes down, but what happens actually is that the charge goes, because potassium gates are slower to close than sodium gates. It actually too much. Okay, I'm so sorry. I just had to check up on my old notes. So what was confusing me is that I didn't quite understand why the almost trading of sodium ions and potassium ions would cause a cell to become so much more positively charged or negatively charged, because both of the ions carry a positive charge. You know what I mean? And it's just because it's really the cell's charge isn't really based off of just them alone. There are a ton of other things. So even though the cell starts out with a lot of potassium, which is positive, it still has a bunch of other things that make it negative, right? Okay, so let's try that again. Okay, depolarization. Okay, once it reaches that threshold, all these sodium channels open and sodium flows into the cell. Um, and then it reaches this spike. Cool, the message is sent through. And then essentially then um, sodium channels are closed and potassium channels are opened, okay, which stops the inflow of sodium but also allows potassium to flow out of the cell. That brings the charge way back down. But what happens is, since sometimes potassium channels are too slow to open, um, too much potassium flows out of the cell, and you end up with a cell that is too negative, or much more negative than its resting state, right? And that is called hyperpolarized. Um, from there is a protein pump, which requires ATP, which is energy, um, to to pump out sodium and bring in potassium, right? And that will allow the cell to return to its resting charge, okay? And another important thing is that during hyperpolarization, a second or another signal cannot be passed through the cell, right? It just cannot happen, which is, yeah, like possibly the point of hyperpolarization, just to prevent those rapid firings. But yeah, yeah. Okay, let's briefly go over the subdivisions of the nervous system. So we've already gone over the central and peripheral nervous system, but the peripheral nervous system also has many subdivisions, okay? So the first two are the somatic and the autonomic nervous system, okay? The somatic nervous system is responsible for voluntary control of the skeletal muscles. And like I went over in my last video, skeletal muscles are the muscles that are attached to the bones that we can control and perforate. Okay, so again, when you're, if you need to lift something, lift a weight, right? All the muscles in your bones, all the muscles in your arms, you have voluntary control over. Okay. Then the autonomic nervous system, that is more for involuntary control of the bodily functions. Think also again to the other two types of muscle, the smooth muscle and the cardiac muscle. Okay, so yeah, the autonomic nervous system. Think your heartbeat, your metabolism, yeah, all those things that you don't really have to think about, and your breathing, um, which, however, you actually also can then have a voluntary control of your breathing. Thank you, thank you. Thanks to the thoracic diaphragm. Okay, and then the autonomic nervous system also further divides into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, so the parasympathetic nervous system is called the rest and digest nervous system, because it's more focused on things like digestion, um, your circadian rhythm, your sleep cycle, and yeah, just really keeping your body in a state of homeostasis. Yeah, and then your sympathetic nervous system is called the fight or flight nervous system, um, and yeah, it's, as the name suggests, it's responsible for your flight or fight system, and yeah, the also with the endocrine system, which I may talk about as well, because that's a big part of our exam. With the endocrine system, many glands are activated by one of the autonomic nervous systems, either sympathetic or parasympathetic, and then the role of the opposite one is to activate a gland which antagonizes that first one. Okay, so say the sympathetic nervous system activates the adrenal medulla to release epinephrine. Then the role of the parasympathetic nervous system would be then to activate the adrenal medulla again to release norepinephrine. Okay, so they kind of antagonize each other in a way, or they make sure that the body is always in a state of homeostasis, which just means that the body is in a state that it should be, I suppose, of balance. Um, yeah, let's go over reflex arcs. Okay, so reflex arcs can either be mono or polysynaptic, and obviously their main role is to transfer information, but also allow us to keep ourselves safe, process information, and then decide on what to do and then how to do that. So, okay, so monosynaptic, as the name suggests, only includes one synapse, okay, between neurons. So it really only includes two neurons, usually a sensory and a motor. And these reflex arcs, don't involve the central nervous system. So it doesn't actually go to the brain. So your brain doesn't have any say in these reflex arcs, and the point of that is to make sure that the space and therefore the time that the signal has to travel is as short as possible. So think you hold your finger to a flame. Okay, your sensory neurons will detect that it's too hot. That signal will be passed through the axon of that sensory neuron, and to the axon terminal, which then would connect directly with a motor neuron. The neurotransmitters will diffuse across the synapse to that motor neuron, and then that motor neuron will attach directly to a muscle. This also, the connecting of the sensory neuron and the motor neuron happens in the spinal cord. So yeah, the spinal cord, because that can be a very important control center, and also then that allows the information to be sent up to the brain with the information on like what it is, you know, all the extra information that isn't really involved in the reflex arc. The actual reflex arc itself, like I said, is completely in the peripheral nervous system. However, like afterwards, your brain needs to know what exactly you were reacting to, you know, so then it can process, oh, there's a flame there, how should I treat it, what should I do, you know, stuff like that. Okay, so that's a monosynaptic reflex arc. Polysynaptic ones are a little more complicated. They include multiple neurons, and therefore they take longer. Okay, so imagine you are holding a button. Okay, you're holding a button, and your buddy taps you on the back, and whenever your buddy taps you on the back, you need to press that button. Okay, and you can't see him as well. So essentially, then your sensory neurons pick up the touch. That information goes to your spinal cord, up to your brain. Then your brain processes it, and it's sent back, and then to a motor neuron, which then goes to your finger, which presses the button. Okay. And the way that the information travels through the spinal cord up to the brain and then back to a motor neuron is through an interneuron. Okay, so interneurons are mainly used in polysynaptic reflex arcs, because they are also found in the central nervous system, unlike sensory and motor neurons. Interneurons are found within the central nervous system as well. Okay, but yeah, those reflex arcs are more complicated. However, they are more specific, and they do involve the brain, but because of that, they can um, integrate like logic reasoning or like reason behind it. Okay. Um, there's so much more. There's so much more. But I'm just thinking because I don't know. Those are all the basics, anyways. I think of just the basic physiology of the nervous system. Maybe I can go into some of the anatomy in the brain in like a later video. But yeah, I think that's all I'm gonna go over right now. And sorry again about the horrible audio quality. It won't be like this all the time. And yeah, thank you. See ya.